Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords. And today I'm going to talk about this mentality of language correction that's going on. If you watched my last video, I was pointing out how even as the WotC ship continues to sink in terms of D&D's sales, they are still now, in fact, they have gone and edited the entire 3 core books in their virtual format, so that if you use them on Roll20, or if you were to download them now, if you were to buy and download one of these in PDF now, you would get, it's basically a Stalinist version, right? Because that's what they used to do in Stalinist Russia, right? That they would put out books with the language altered to fit the political necessities, or they'd make photos and someone would be blurred out of the photo because he was no longer part of the acceptable crowd, that kind of thing. And so they've done this, and I pointed out in the last video how it seems likely that very soon they're going to go after the barbarian as a class, because they're already going after barbarian as a word. And I wanted to comment that it seems to me that there are some people that are there are people that are doing this with full maliciousness, right? Like, they know this is nonsense. They're doing it to intentionally disrupt our society and our civilization. Then there's also the people that are against it, right? That are opposed, and they can be opposed for different reasons, but generally speaking, they don't want to be told what to do, right? In one form or another. But then there's also people the video that I got as a source for this change in language material, that what they had altered, which now Diversity and Dragons, as of Wednesday, did a live stream where he talks about this, about the WotC language control, and he was watching the same video I was, so he does a much better breakdown of the specifics of that video. I don't even remember the guy's name. I don't care. These people are just useless WotC shills. Except to say that guy represents the kind of third characteristic, it seems to me, which is of a person who is a true believer in this as a political concept, right? And you see this because at the end of the video, he actually basically says, you need to get a diversity consultant if you're going to write RPG books these days, because there are some things you just can't say. You're not allowed to say it anymore. The language has changed and is constantly changing, and that's why we need these experts to tell us what the new language is, right? That's basically what he says. So he is literally advocating for this idea that there be this supposed elite, which are ironically the most useless people in the world, right? Like, I can't think of a job that is more fake and more useless than diversity consultant. These are people who would not be able to get a job as school teachers, most likely, because if they did, they'd be doing that. Because there are some diversity consultants, of course, they're being paid serious bank, right? You're talking about 6-figure salaries to be diversity consultants at corporations, but those are the exception, right? Most of them are basically trying to do, They're grifters, right? They're trying to make a fast buck anywhere by saying, I will call you racist unless you hire me to correct your language, and you'll pay them off, and then they won't care about you anymore. They're literally con men, and yet those people, the guy who did this video thinks those people need to be held up as the avatars, as the high priests of our society, of what we are allowed to say and think at any given moment, which is really terrifying. So he was adding in his video things that saying that, nowadays there's certain things that you just shouldn't put into an RPG altogether. And his go-to example was slavery, right? There's no reason, he says, why you should have slavery in any RPG. And even if it's done as an example of a great evil, and that the characters are meant to free slaves or something like that, that's still enormously problematic. Presumably because the players are white, I'm guessing. I don't know why, but he seems to think that being heroic and freeing slaves is itself still problematic. So to him, I say, go screw yourself. There's no topic that I can think of that must not exist in an RPG. There are some that, are probably a little dubious to include in an RPG, but the idea that there's something you cannot put in at all is just idiotic. And you people are idiots for believing that, for having this position that we have to edit not just our thoughts, our language, but also obviously our history. We need to basically, there are topics that cannot be mentioned. Never mind like he who cannot be named. It's like entire subjects of the human experience cannot be commented upon, except by certain people, of course, people with magic blood for the most part. You know what I mean by that? I've used that term often here before, right? That this idea that the identitarian left has, probably the identitarian right has it too, but just for the opposite color, right? Because they're exactly the same garbage. That only the people that have that pure, skin tone can say the things about the skin tone people. And nobody else may say it, right? It doesn't matter. Your expertise doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you were raised in like a bubble by wolves. If you have, Asian skin and you come out there, you're an expert on China. Whereas somebody, a white person who had not, who has no Asian skin, but has studied China for 20 years can never understand it. It's impossible, right? That is the worldview that they have. So, all of this is basically an attempt to deconstruct our culture. And part of that process this is part of the humiliation process, I guess you could say, where you are told you can't use that word anymore. You must use this word. You can't talk about this anymore. You must talk about it this other way, right? And so that you are constantly off of your balance. You never know what's the right thing to say. And they can choose. The real point of all of that is that they subconsciously, you come to understand that these people that have put themselves in positions of power can destroy you at any moment by just making up that you have in some way been offensive, even if it wasn't offensive literally a second ago. And we've seen that happen, right? We've seen people saying things on Tuesday that nobody questioned. And then some guy says it and someone wants to destroy him. Suddenly that is an unspeakable thing to say, and it always was. They revise it. We've always been at war with Eurasia, right? So in RPGs, I don't think that there's a single topic that cannot be covered and that can be covered in almost any way. Now, obviously, there are some topics that maybe are not good to cover in a certain way, right? Like, if you're running, but I don't mean that that a person shouldn't be permitted to publish something like this. What I am saying is that if they did, it should probably be condemned, right? So if you're doing an RPG, I don't know, where you're heroic child kidnappers, like you're the guys, you're the protagonist, and I don't know, you're running a child trafficking ring, and it's totally fine, right? Like it's presented as a cool thing. I think that anyone who wrote something like that would be deeply troubled. Similarly, of course, these racial supremacist games, right? Like My Frog and Coyote and Crow, right? These ones that are meant to be to suggest that people of a certain race are literally superior to people of other races. Those sorts of games are despicable, right? And I certainly wouldn't run them, and I wouldn't sell them if I had a storefront. But these guys, if they publish it, the point is you condemn it, you ridicule it, but that they can still be made, right? Like that's a fundamental part of our civilizational value, this freedom of conscience and freedom of expression, and so that means people will make stuff you don't like. I don't like those games that I just mentioned, but one has to be able to accept that those games exist. Now, that means you can call out those games, you can call out the people who make those games, you can criticize them, you can choose not to have them on your YouTube channel, or if you do, you damn well better call them on their garbage, right? But they still have a right in theory to have it. And so like slavery, forget that. I'm not going to stand here and say, oh, your RPGs should only have slavery if you present it as something that everyone understands in the setting as a great evil and that there are heroes trying to fight against it, right? Because that's nonsense. If you're doing any historical game prior to, say, the late 1700s at the very earliest, then there will be nowhere where that would make sense, where this idea, because you know why? It was white Europeans that invented this idea that slavery is bad, right? They are the ones who came to have the social evolution as a culture, not because of their skin color or something like that, but because of a weird series of events that took place, like that start with the fact that Genghis Khan kicked the crap out of the Chinese and the Indian and the Arab civilizations that were there at the moment. And so the last man standing that wasn't massively traumatized, and even the Eastern Europeans like the Russians, right? The last civilization that wasn't massively traumatized by Genghis Khan was the West. Then the Black Death came and killed half of the West. And then all of a sudden there was that caused this enormous social shift in the society that allowed for the development of the Renaissance and then for the Rosicrucian Enlightenment and then for the Enlightenment. Okay, so this led to a process by which people started to think in a different way. And that's the only society that thought that institutionally speaking, the institution of slavery was an unquestionable evil. That's the only place where it could. Even there, they had to fight multiple wars over it, right? They had to go and stop the slave trade in the ocean trade. The English did that. They also stopped the slave trade in their own colonies, but that was easy for them. But there were those colonies that had gotten away, and those guys had to, the U.S. had to fight a whole civil war over it. So all of that is a product of Western civilization and its moral superiority that was developed by a historical process. Before that, pretty much every culture felt that, slavery, it would suck to be a slave, right? It's really terrible if you're a slave. There were cultures that argued it's good to be nice to slaves. They should have certain conditions met for their standard of living. But fundamentally, slavery was a thing and it was just totally accepted, right? So if you're running any kind of a historical campaign, slavery exists as a possibility. In my Arrows of Indra game, there's slavery. There are slave markets and people can be slaves. I also put there all about, the conditions that they have and what were the customs or rules about liberating slaves, because I presumed, of course, that some player characters might want to liberate slaves. Of course, all through history, slaves were being liberated at different moments for different reasons, often by merit, right? In Sword and Caravan, there's also slaves, of course. The Middle Eastern cultures and the Steppes cultures and China all had slavery. In my old school companion, I don't think there's much slavery. That's because though Europe did not, medieval Europe didn't reject the institution of slavery as such, but they just didn't have a lot of slaves. That was something that had gone out with the fall of Rome, basically, and instead they had things like serfs, which are not that much better than slaves, actually. But the idea that, oh no, you can't even write that in a game, that's insane. That's absolutely insane. That is that's a fundamental element of history in almost any setting. So what he's saying and what WotC is saying, and this is of course something that we've already known for a while, is that you are forbidden from making anything that is based on actual history. So of course part of the goal of the kind of Pol Pot style Stalinism that these people support is year zero, right? It's the idea that we erase history, so that all of those bad conditionings, all those bad ways are driven away, and then the new generation gets indoctrinated only into the pure communist manifesto that they have created for themselves now, the new manifesto, which changes over time so that each generation becomes more revolutionarily pure, So these guys are idiots. But my point of this video was largely that, I guess, to say that these guys are idiots. But to say, as far as I'm concerned, there's no topic that cannot be that cannot be considered, right? Now, there are good and bad ways of describing a topic, right? If you have a setting where there are slaves, and I don't know, you're just like, oh yeah, slavery, excellent, or something like that. You treat it as though it's like super cool or something, that slavery as an institution was cool. That would be kind of bad, Like, I mean, that would be a bad design, If you're doing a setting about slavery and you have a giant table of different kinds of sex slaves, just like that's a little bit pervy, right? That would seem a bit weird, instead of just having something there, including it as part of the setting, but giving it its proper context and neither glorifying it nor turning it into something sultry, something gross like that, And this is the same for most things, right? Like a sectarian conflict, right? My Sword and Caravan campaign that, I got social encounters here to represent that, even though social encounters can be used for any setting. But it's, came out as a supplement for Sword and Caravan. In the Sword and Caravan setting, a part of the campaign is obviously the Crusades, the third and technically the fourth and the German and then the fifth Crusade. And that is sectarian conflict. And from my perspective, now I know that there might be some people that are listening that might like a campaign that is, the heroic, ideal, perfect, glorious Christians fighting against the evil, savage, barbaric Saracens or something like that, but that's not what reality was, right? The Ayyubids were a very sophisticated and advanced culture. This is before Genghis Khan came and ruined the Muslim world, right? And they had very sophisticated codes, right? And of course, there were a lot of them who were bastards, right? And then the Crusader states were a society that was noble and faith driven. And they also had a bunch of guys who were assholes, And Richard the Lionheart and the other Crusader kings, well, almost all of them were assholes, but some of them were amazing, incredible assholes, especially Richard. Like Richard was just he was amazing. He was very much an asshole. Don't get me wrong, but he was an incredible figure. And so, if you depict this as a simple, like to me, part of what would offend me there as a historian would be that if you depicted this conflict as just these guys good, these guys bad, and it's just kind of meant to be an exercise in like propaganda for your own side or something for whatever. Even like, I mean, I can't imagine unless you're stupid, and I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are stupid, hopefully not a lot who watch my show regularly, but if you happen to be watching now and you happen to be a stupid person, maybe you're the type of person that would be like, yeah, I'd revel on being able to play a game where I'm a knight and I just get to kill these guys. So then that's all you want, right? But you would think that if you're, even if you're strongly sided on one side or the other, and let's face it, in the RPG hobby, there aren't a lot of, there are Muslim RPG gamers, but there aren't a ton of them. So most of the ones that would be very inclined to be to be partisan in this would probably be on the Christian side, right? Even then, I would think you'd want as accurate a depiction as possible, right? Something that is accurate and true. There's two ways to not be accurate and true in your depiction of almost anything in a context of an RPG. One is if you have if you dumb it down into a jingoistic kind of story, right? Now, don't get me wrong. You know that I talk constantly about the archetypal importance of the power between good and evil, right? But we have to distinguish that as being, that's what you do in myth, right? When you slip out of history and into myth, when suddenly you go off to the desert and there you find jinns and devils and who knows what else, right? Great saints standing on pillars, or masters living in caves, or terrible creatures, hybrid creatures coming out of the desert sands. All of those things are myth. And so there, yes, suddenly you move out of this world of complexities and into this world of absolutes. But in the part of the game where you are dealing with a world of men, in the world of man, there is no purest archetype, right? Or if there is that, those are such exceptional people that they're usually people that become archetypes after they're dead, right? That sort of thing. So in the world of men, you want to have these complexities. You don't want to sugarcoat it, or to just, to turn it into something that's just like you're having, what do you call it in the US, where you go and cheer for the football team before a pep rally. You're having a pep rally. That's it. We didn't have pep rallies in Canada, at least not where I was. So you don't really want that. So you don't want to turn it into a pep rally. Then the other way that you could screw it up, obviously, is if you project postmodern 21st century values into that scenario, right? If somebody were to do a Crusader state setting like Sword and Caravan, but they're going to be like, well, obviously the Crusaders are evil colonizers, and the darker skinned Ayyubids are heroic decolonizers, even though they actually, Saladin had an enormous empire, and he was literally ruling over foreign areas, and all of this sort of stuff. And you start getting into that kind of stupidity of projecting modern values into story, myth, and certainly history, and that's where these guys go wrong. When they start to say stuff like, oh, well, you can't say barbarian. That's not right. Well, what's wrong with saying barbarian? Somebody said you can't say civilized, because that implies that some people were better at it. Well, civilized literally means, it comes from civis. It means people that have built cities, right? Societies. There have always been societies that ended up creating and constructing cities, and those were civilizations, versus the wandering nomadic sort of cultures that did not create civilizations, right? These migrant cultures, or barbarians. Yeah. So this is a distinction that's just a natural thing to look at in the context of the analysis of history. You're not saying that civilized people are always better than people that are not city dwellers, right? Than these nomadic cultures. Because there's certainly enormous amounts of virtues that those nomadic cultures have. For starters, as we are now seeing in certain ways, right? They come along to destroy civilizations that have become so cancerously decadent that they don't deserve to exist anymore. That's horrible for the people who are living through it. But if you're not strong enough to immunize yourself against that, obviously you kind of have to go, because otherwise it's just only going to get worse. So we kind of hope when that happens, especially if it's happening to us, that we will find the strength to overcome that sort of force. But it's not that it's like almost a natural life cycle of society that sort of thing can happen. Anyway, the point is that this is the idea that you're going to ascribe these qualities of goodness or badness, whether it's for jingoistic reasons or whether it's for the reason of ideological propaganda. Because again, here's another case. I was just saying in a previous video that right-wing identitarians, right-wing race grifters and left-wing racist grifters are exactly the same. They just wear the opposite team's shirts, right? Well, this is another case which is exactly that too, right? Like if you're doing an RPG that's meant to be propaganda for whatever historical or religious beef you've got, versus if you're doing an RPG because you want to force change in our society today by imposing progressive values into a culture that had no such progressive values, right? So like how, I don't know if you guys have heard that there's this guy that is now came out saying that the Emperor Elagabalus was transgender, even though that word would make no sense at all to the way that Romans viewed either sexuality or gender. And the fact is Elagabalus was a monster, right? He was a psychotic tyrant. He was a spoiled brat child king that did horrible things. Right? That's why they ended up killing him. So it seems really strange that people would do that, but they do it because they want to impose this agenda, right? So if they're going to present barbarians as being these wonderful advanced people, right? They don't actually, they're like Wakandans. They don't need cities. They're just so perfect, and they use the power of nature to heal the world, and then city dwellers are these evil oppressors, unless there are some other city dwellers with slightly lighter skin somewhere nearby, in which case those are the evil oppressors and these people are the victims. Like that kind of mentality. It's all so stupid. And so basically what I'm saying is that the whole notion of trying to essentially what D&D is doing right now in changing this language is trying to alter history. And the whole notion of altering history destroys a part of what we are. It always does. And changing language is just a way of doing that at a micro scale, right? Because if you're suddenly saying, well, there used to be this word called savage or called barbarian, but now you can't use that word anymore. It doesn't exist anymore. We can't even acknowledge that it exists. We have to supplant it by something else, like wanderers or whatever. But that doesn't mean the same thing. But there you go. That's the point. It doesn't mean the same thing. We're trying to change how you think by changing the language you're allowed to use. That's classic Michel Foucault, right? That is Foucaultian postmodernism being weaponized by Stalinists. And just don't fall for it. In your RPG, you can do whatever you want, right? But I also, while I'm at it, advocate that you choose the thinking path. The most interesting RPG settings are going to be the ones that are not propagandistic or jingoistic, but can present this mix of a human society that is complex, interwoven with a mythic universe that the player characters go out into at certain moments into the adventure, where suddenly things are different because you're dealing with the supernatural quality of the archetypes. Give that some thought. I guess that's everything for today. If you like this video, please subscribe, share the video anywhere you can find it, anywhere you think people will find it interesting, rather. And if you want to support me, well, pick up my products. We've got Social Encounters on the Silk Road here. That's a small book that is got rules for OSR reaction role-based social interactions that are, I think, really very good. Yeah, and you can use them in any OSR setting. The Old School Companion 1 is full of material that you can add to any OSR rules to give an additional medieval style. It's got tons of things, including like critical tables, some classes, magic, lots of types of magic, sections on what like elves are like, society, aristocracy, the court, merchant work, all sorts of stuff. And of course, Arrows of Indra, an oldie but a goodie. It's one of my oldest games that I still promote, but it's OSR role-playing in an epic Indian fantasy world, basically the world of the Mahabharata. And check out all my other products. RPG Pundit Presents 109, Medieval Dream Magic, has come out, and it's doing quite well. An entire system of magic that you can put into any OSR game that is based on the medieval ideas of the magic of dreams and how dreams worked and how you could go into the world of dreams, or how you could get prophecies from dreams or things like that. And keep an eye open for, at some point, I don't know, I'm getting a bit demoralized at this point. I don't know. I don't want to say for sure that it's even going to happen at this point, but in theory, Giant Slayer Games is supposed to be working with me to put out the Pundit files at some point soon as a subscription service. But I haven't heard anything from them in quite a while, and the process has been so slow. But in one form or another, the Pundit files are going to come out somewhere, whether it's that way or as a subscription option here on YouTube or something like that. I wanted to do something nice for these competitors to drive through, right? And I tried the other guys first, the ones that were there first before. What the hell is that one? I forget the name. Anyways, these two guys there are these two websites that are competing with drive-through. And I went to the first one, which was a bigger one, and they ignored me completely. I went to the second one. I proposed this. He said it's a great idea, and then there's been like endless delays. We've been talking about this for ages. I've been ready for it to go for at least the last month and a half. I've got all the material on my end done, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But in some way, form, or another, I'm going to be doing the Pundit files. And before the end of the year, there should be Baptism of Fire. But anyways, check out the description of my video. You will see there all of my links to all of my different products and where you can get them. I really appreciate it, but I also guarantee you that you're going to get stuff here that is not going to be propagandistic. It's going to be really playable and also really smart, I think. Like not to toot my own horn, but that it's got a different tone than most generic fantasy. It's going to be something that you'll like, I hope. That's everything for today. Currently smoking oversized Lorenzetti plus Argento roots.